Hi, this is Nicola Whitehall here. I'm just doing my testimony today. Thought I'd get that out there, go straight into it. So I had a biblical upbringing, brought up with Bible stories and church till I was 12. My father was a pilot and my mother used to be a teacher, a primary school teacher before I was born. Later she became a counsellor. I grew up with learning ballet and modern dance and national dance and piano to quite a high level till I was 18. Dance throughout my life became a lifeline. It was something that in the depths of my despair and darkness, suicidalness, or just not being able to cope, I would just get up into my room and I just dance, or I'd just get out, go on the train somewhere and dance on a beach, and it would just somehow allow me to keep going. It was like getting to my roots and just expressing myself, and I guess my emotion came out in there. Yeah, at school I was quite popular till I was about 10. From the age of about 11 to 18, I really didn't have any close friends at all. Mostly a loner. There were some people in my high school who were very lovely Christian people who reached out to me and allowed me to sit with their Christian group. They were more or less involved in a church group and youth group, which I only very rarely went to. So they lived in a whole world which was separate from me, but they were very lovely to me. But basically, I felt alone in my intermediate and high school years, so from 11 to 18. At my dance classes for about 4 or 5 years, from about the age of 12 to 16, 17, there was some emotional abuse at my dance school from there was a mother of one of the other dancers who would kind of get me alone, and she'd say really nasty things, and sometimes she'd be even more brazen, and she would say things in front of a student teacher, or just things which were really hurtful or put down or accusatory, or just made me feel like something was really wrong with me. And by the end of that time, about 17, I did a dance, quite a high up level dance exam. It was intermediate ballet, and I failed that exam, and my world started to fall apart because I was afraid of losing my place with the girls who were in a particular group and being left behind. I was aware of the fact that despite how hard I'd tried, I was still alone at school and at dance and at home. Well, I mean, I had my family, but they all had their own friends. And I started to go in crisis, and I became anorexic. I lost about 1.5 stone in a matter of a month or so, month and a half maybe. And yeah, I went into this anorexic state. I had what I would call a psychosis, and I didn't know that at the time, but I began to believe I was very evil, that I'd hurt people, that I had to punish myself to make up for the evil. I would put pins in myself, or I'd make myself throw up straight after I'd eaten, or I'd dance without eating, and then I'd make myself hold heavy beams and things that I couldn't hold, and just put hair clips and electrical sockets to give myself shocks, things like that. And I just believed I was really evil. As I went back to school and dance, I wasn't very popular. People left the classes I was in, and I wasn't popular at school either. Apparently, a lot of the girls were worried about me, I heard. I was just sitting by myself, didn't talk to anyone. I was afraid that if people saw how evil I was inside, that it would just be so terrible. So if people tried to make a conversation with me, I would very rarely answer. Some of the Christian girls that let me sit next to them at their Christian group at school throughout the years invited me to an ice cream party, but I was just too terrified. It was just beyond something that I could do. And about quarter of the year through my last high school year, uh, I decided that I was hurting people, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop, that I was going to be a disappointment to my parents. So I genuinely decided that I had to take my life. And I didn't want to take my life, but I just thought it was the only solution. So I went to my Bible, which I hadn't picked up in years, and I had a Bible in my bookcase, and I looked for a way out. Um, and I read, I think, Hebrews, something in Hebrews that says, once you've accepted God, then you turn away, there's no hope of salvation and you're going to burn in hell. So I misinterpreted that verse and where I was. And so I was sure that I was going to burn in hell, but I still wanted to commit suicide because I thought it was the right thing to do. So I went to do that. I sat there for a minute. I thought, right, I'm going to do this. I was about to do that. And then it was like my whole perspective just suddenly changed. The air around me cleared. What I would now call a psychosis in my brain, it just disappeared, and it was like I woke up from a sleep, and I said, "What am I doing here?" I just literally picked up my bag and walked out of the place and left, and I didn't take my life, which was amazing because, and I just think that the Christian girls at the school, I heard later, had been praying for me. Maybe they'd got together in their youth group, noticed that I was not looking very happy and had no friends, and they'd prayed for me, and I truly believe that their prayers were what saved my life. They wouldn't have known perhaps that I was suicidal, but I do believe that those girls were responsible for saving my life. And so my whole personality changed. So I had a complete personality makeover as I became saved, because about a month after that, God spoke to me in my sleep. 4 a.m. woke me up. He said, "What happened to you was not your fault, and you are forgiven." And I didn't know I could be forgiven. I just didn't have that concept. I just thought that if I was guilty, I was guilty, and that I had to always be guilty or a bad person. So anyhow, I was very happy, and suddenly you couldn't shut me up. I was talking to everyone in the school, people I didn't know, people I did know, being a busybody, putting Bibles in teachers' boxes and going to visit old people and telling them about the Bible and Jesus and giving them Bibles, being a crazy evangelist. And then I I went from that severe depression where I'd had the anorexia, and then my mood started to elevate, and what I now know was a bipolar disorder, emerging bipolar disorder that I used to be diagnosed with. And so I was very accelerated. I couldn't sit down. I was very restless. Couldn't hold trains of thoughts very clearly. And there was an old man in his 70s, early 70s, who was living around the road from my piano teacher. My piano teacher said, "Oh, he's such a lovely man. He's lonely, but he's such a lovely man. But I feel so sad for him because he's all by himself." So I thought, here's a new Christian convert. Here's someone for me to take to church. So I would go visit to him, talk to him, and I was pretty lonely at the time. So I told him about my anorexia and about how God had saved me, and eventually he ended up locking me in his room and sexually abusing me for 2.5 hours, and that pretty much devastated me. I was living out at a hostel at the time. I came back home, told my mum what had happened, and mum was having a crisis of her own. She was about to leave. She decided to leave for another city to do a counselling degree so she could further her education. And my dad couldn't go to that same place, so he was going to stay, and the houses were going to split into two. And my sister and my brother went up with mum to the place they were going, and me and my two of the brothers left, stayed with my dad. And that was pretty devastating for me. After the sexual abuse, after going to the police, I slept for 2 weeks. I slept 20 hours a day. I was only awake 4 hours a day. I was trying to push away all the pain, all the hurt, all that stuff. And yeah, and I really needed my mum, but she left, and I had no relationship with my father. He was in the house, and I talked to him from time to time about normal things, but nothing deep. There was no, I wasn't really fathered by my father growing up, so um, I didn't have that connection that I could just talk to him the way that I could my mother. So my mother, before she left, tried to get me to sign forms and send away forms to go to university, but I refused. And my father tried for a few weeks the same thing. I refused until he eventually left me alone and left me to myself and didn't really communicate with me for quite a few months. But yeah, I just knew innately in myself that if I went to university, I just couldn't face it. I knew that I'd just run away, go hide and live under a bridge or something. So I guess I felt it was safer for me to stay at home. And I didn't feel I could communicate that with my parents because they didn't understand. They thought I should be going to university. So I spent on my bed 9 months alone. My father would call me for dinner or to hang out the washing, but other than that, I had no communication with, very little communication with him or my brothers in the house. So for 9 months, I lay on my bed, occasionally went out to feed the animals, put on a lot of weight, and was just depressed and wrote some poetry. Then, as it happened with my anorexic illness, I started to elevate. I started to go up. I started to get confidence back, started to get energy back. And I realized that, yeah, that I was very angry, and I was angry at my dad for not fathering me, and I let some of that out. And I went to an emergency housing for a while. I had a bit of an altercation with my dad, and I was out walking the streets late at night in the dark in the early hours of the morning and getting myself in dangerous situations. Eventually, in December, January, the year after I finished college, I went on a crippled children's camp to help children from 5 to 16, help them with their personal cares, help them with recreation, with clothing, with feeding, whatever they needed. And I did that, but I was very manic, so very oversensitive, very easily to reactive. I got upset when I was accused of stealing money, which I just accidentally lost, and I raced off. We were out in Castle Point, out by a beach that was a long way away from anywhere. I ran into a forest for 6 hours, and I was rescued by police dogs. Apparently, it was a very dangerous part of forest, and had not there been someone in the camp who was a policeman who knew the guy that handles the police dogs, I would probably have died because it was a very dangerous area of bush that I'd ran off into, and I was in my bare feet. I had no food, no clothing apart from the t-shirt, and no water. I don't think I had water. I just was, but I was unwell, mentally unwell, because I thought I was going to live in the bush. So they rescued me, and I was very unhappy about that. They realised they couldn't keep me at the crippled children's camp, so they took me to a police cell where I spent the night, and I was interviewed by detectives, and then I was taken in a police car to my home, and where I was seen by two doctors and taken to a mental institution in a neighbouring city. My parents transported me there. So I was there pretty much with a few breaks for halfway houses for 6 months and 6 weeks, sorry, and 2 weeks. Basically from January to November, December, I was in the mental institution, and uh, something very bad happened to me on the first day that I was in the mental institution, but I didn't know that until just last year. The Lord revealed it to me. But I did notice that my behavior changed markedly when I was in the mental institution. Not in the first 6 weeks I was there when I was manic, but I came back from a halfway house for a few weeks, and I came back into the mental institution, and my behavior was very provocative towards the males, and I had some really problematic behavior out when I was in the community around people, and I couldn't behave properly, and I'd upset people, and I was people in the mental institution, the doctors, the nurses, were very angry at me, very hateful, would laugh at me, would say nasty things, because I didn't understand why I was behaving the way I was. I'd either be really hateful and rejecting, or really sexually provocative, or I just didn't know how to behave, and I couldn't change the way I was behaving and all that stuff. So um, eventually I was not getting well at the mental institution, so they were going to put me in long-term care. So long-term care would mean a different villa. That mental institution had, I think, 7 villas up one valley and 7 villas up the other. There was a criminal villa, and there was a villa for elderly people, for people with Down syndrome, for people with Alzheimer's, all sorts of different reasons. So because I wasn't responding to medication or treatment, and I'd refused to talk to any of my doctors or psychologists or anyone, I wasn't getting well, and they were going to keep me long term. And I met a girl there who was 30, who had gone to the institution because she was attempted suicide, and she was still there at 30, so she'd been there 14 years and really didn't have the help to get her rehabilitated and out into the community. So that was what it was looking like for me, that I was going to be a long-term resident. That really scared me, but I didn't have any power at that time. Anyhow, they decided to let me out into the community by the grace of God, and they just started up a rehabilitation service and rehabilitation houses, which were staffed by nurses and occupational therapists, and they set up a program for me and the other people who were in the program. And my nana came down, my mother's mother came down to visit me, and she picked some flowers with me. I had some nice times with her. Throughout my time in the mental institution, she sent me a Derek Prince book full of proclamations. I didn't know how to decree scripture, but I liked to have it, and I liked to look at it. Quite a lot of the time when I was in the mental institution, when I was in the severe depression, I was thinking about taking my life again. I was looking at the fertilizer, the poison at the end of the steps, and I was looking at ropes and things and kind of planning things out, but I wasn't fully serious. But I was a pretty hard time, a pretty low time. So after a year and a half in rehab, I decided to disappear off to university to do music. And I spent there 6 years, and I got about 2/3 of a degree. I just kept failing things, and it took me a long time to realize that music composition wasn't really my thing, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. But I wasn't listening to that, my heart. I wanted to do dance, or I wanted to do writing. But I was listening to other voices that were telling me other things, so I just kept going back to the music, not realizing that it would be in my best interest to do something different. At the university, some of my bad behavior from the mental institution was still there, so I got in some trouble for sexual harassment of a student, and that got me back into a suicidal state as well. Just before I left university in 2000, I went on the worship team for a year at a local church. 3 years before I left the university, I started to try and learn to hear God's voice for myself and to hear encouraging words from God for other people. In 2000, I just left university, and I went to a Bill Subritsky meeting, and I went for ministry afterwards. And he said he saw a picture of a sailboat way, way, way out in the ocean going totally in the wrong direction. So we all decided that I was in the wrong place at university, and that I should go to Bible college. So I went to Bible college and was there for several years and got a certificate in Christian ministries, and a certificate in Christian studies. During that time, I became a member of a Christian group, interdenominational. We were all from different denominations, and we did ballet and contemporary, and we did performances, we choreographed dances, we'd all had dance backgrounds or were just interested in dance, and we performed workshops, and we went around churches and taught things, and we were in the local secular fringe festival, and we took workshops in the dance your socks off, and we did, in church concerts or other concerts or church camps, we performed dances. So I did that for several years. So that was 2001 to 3 that started. 2004, I ended up in the psych ward again, this time a lot worse, completely insane, thinking that I was the sinless female version of Jesus Christ and making a whole lot of accusations about rape and abuse that people had done to me. And so I was put in the psych ward for 2 months, and I wrote a story about that, which I haven't published. I also did from 2001 to 14. I did a lot of household cleaning, and from 2007 to 2014, I did some in-depth counselling to help me with the sexual abuse that I'd been through when I was 18, and just to deal with some family issues and just getting on my feet. And my memoir that I'm writing at the moment is about that counselling, because there were so many important keys that got me into a much weller place than I'd ever been, as well as my mental health. I had very good counselling from an American counsellor. 2012 to 14, I pursued my dream of writing, creative writing, and I did an online creative writing course, wrote a few good stories. And then after that, I was a communications writer for Arts Access Aotearoa. I left that in about 2016. I became friends with Matthew Robert Payne in mid-year 2017 onwards to 2019, and I started prophesying on his website. So that's opened up new doors for ministry, being able to minister prophetically. And now I'm on Audie Howard's website, Fire in the Spirit Prophetic Ministries, and I do prophetic words and prophetic blueprints that tell people God's call for their life, the gifts he's given them, what he's going to do with their gifts, the 12-month prophetic forecast, and I take people on heaven trips in their mind's eye, and do prophetic coaching. So those are the services I offer now. Yes, and around March 2019, I found a counsellor, Orty, and he diagnosed me with something new when I was in hospital in 2004, the psychiatric ward. I'd been diagnosed, and I'll call this past, let's not claim it for now. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is kind of a midway between schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It has the thought disorder of the schizophrenia, and it has the mood disorder of the manic depressive. And so he just diagnosed me with DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, which is another name. The old name for that is multiple personality disorder. So, and then it became a whole unveiling for a good 8 months, 9 months, a long time, of just the Lord beginning to reveal in visions that started in the counselling when Audie would bring up an age, and the Lord would be giving him some ideas about that age, like he'd get words of knowledge about depression and guilt and whatever. And then I'd start to have a memory of when I was 7, and then it would lead to a memory of something that happened when I was 7. So it first came out and I realized that I was raped at 7. and I saw a vision of it, and then I saw the second vision of it, of me telling my mum about it, and then um, my counsellor Orty saw the same vision, and he was seeing some aspects of the farm where it occurred, and yes. So that was a shock for me. It kind of gave me a little idea of why I've had the behavioral problems I've had, why I haven't want to be around people, like I've isolated a lot throughout my life, had difficulty wanting to be around people or finding friends. So, but then it kind of, I thought that was it, but then the Lord says there's actually more that I'm going to reveal to you. And then there was a rape in my second year at intermediate school, schoolboy, when I was 12, 13, and then a gang rape at 14 on a school trip after I got off a bus. And then there was a rape at 41, and at age 41, I'm now 48. And also something that had happened when I was 8 months and 2 days. Already heard that specifically from the Lord, and he saw some things which when I looked in my photograph book were things that I wore at the age of 8 months. And so that was just a process of doing all the healing. I moved on to counseling with some Tennessee pastors from Global Fire Church, and they went through my timeline, and they started at 8 months where I was first abused, and they went right through the timeline up to 41 where I was last abused or raped, and they went through. And my counselor and I were hearing the Lord for ages, where the Lord would pause and say something happened here, and they'd pray the protection over that. So she paused specifically when we got to 16 and when we got to 41, and she says the Lord's paying extra attention to this because and there's something important about this when this rape happened, and the Lord had her pour oil and wine into it because Orty and the counselors in Global Fire would supernaturally bring healing. Orty did that through the heart chambers, going into the heart chambers and facing up to the person who abused you or hurt you and forgiving them and allowing the Lord to cleanse and wash and heal you. And yes, so with my counsellors in Global Fire, there was a special stopping at 16 and at 41. And as the Lord began to speak to me, he took me up to heaven, and I realised that there had been a miscarriage at 16 and at 41. So there'd been some conceptions there. So I actually have been and met my daughter, who is now about 6 or 7, I think, in heaven. So in earth years. In heaven the time is different, but I've had some encounters with her. She's very artistic. Her name is Esther. She is doing artistic things. She's embroidering quilts, and she's learning music from my grandfather and art from my grandmother. That's my mum's parents. And my son, who's about, I think, 32, from the 16-year-old rape, he is in a string quartet. I got to hear some of his music. I think he was a violin, or I can't remember. I only had one encounter with him, and the Lord let me meet him and hug him, but it was short. So yeah. So as I've been doing this counselling over the last almost 2 years now, with some with my pastors, church pastors here in Wellington where I live, as well as the pastors in Global Fire, and previously with Orty, there's a good 20 plus rapes or sexual abuses that have gone throughout my life, which has just kind of been the enemy's attempt to stop me fulfilling the destiny of my life. And I've had so much healing. If you wonder why, well, how didn't you know? that these things had happened to you, it's because it's too much for the mind to handle. So the trauma is buried in an alternate personality, and it's buried at a very young age. And so the counselor will bring forth the child where the trauma happened. So the counselor might ask, okay, what's your name, the person where this trauma happened? And I'll say, my name's Mary, I'm 5, whatever. And the counselor will ask questions, and then the counselor will ask if I have Jesus in my heart, and if I can forgive the person who raped me or abused me. And there's just a whole healing process. And if you've seen me 2 years ago and you see me now, you'll see there's a huge difference in my mental health. I still struggle with demonic anxiety attacks, spiritual attacks that come from hell, that cause me a lot of difficulty. And I have a lot of trouble. It takes me a lot of courage to be around people when you've had a lot of trauma. You're pretty afraid of people. There's trust issues in trusting people. But I want you to know that there's healing available for whatever abuse you've had, whatever situations have been in your life. God can bring you through it. He's redeeming me, and I've got a great future ahead. And yes, and I'm walking forward in my ministry and hope to expand on my ministry later. And as God continues to heal me, all the alternate personalities get integrated into my core personality, so that instead of being split off little parts that can be captured by the enemy and tormented, they can be healed and then come back into my core personality. So that's a really helpful thing. That's called DID, and the healing is available through many different counselors. If you want to inquire about that, I can let you know who I know who helps with those things. So God bless you, and that is my testimony. I've now interestingly come into a church in the last 5 or 6 months that has been doing 30 years of work with DID people. So their whole church is based around their ministry, and a lot of people have altars and have buried traumas. And most people, you don't have to have a whole lot of sexual traumas or any kind of traumas in your life. But most people have some altars, whether you had a car accident, or whether your mother yelled at you one time, or whether you were locked in a box, or someone bullied you at school, or just there's all kinds of things. And people that have been to war and have had terrible experiences, they can have altars. There's all sorts of reasons you can have altars, and it's just the mind's way of processing what is too much for the human mind to handle. So most people have altars. Not everybody you'd call has dissociative identity disorder. But soon I won't have that because I'll be healed. So God bless you. I hope you enjoyed my testimony. Bye.